Yajnadevam Ratvijam.
Well, hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome all. My name is Steve Bonta, and I'm pleased to present my colleague and friend Yajnadevam. We have a shared interest in the Indus script, which is one of the greatest mysteries of modern archaeology. Probably needs no particular introduction as far as that goes, but Yajnadevam and I have in common the fact that we both have worked out decipherments of the script, and although some of our results differ, we have independently concluded, kind of found each other on this basis, that we both are convinced, and our methodologies are both are very persuasive. We believe that that the script in fact encodes an early form of something like Sanskrit or Indo-Aryan. So Yajnadevam is a background in cryptography, and without further ado, I'm going to turn the time over to him, mute myself, and Yajnadevam, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. So, yeah, as most of you are aware, I have deciphered this using cryptography and mathematical means. And without further ado, let's start the presentation. So what are you going to get from this presentation? A little bit of a background on the Indus civilization. I won't go into detail because there's other videos of mine that have a lot more on this. A little bit on the script itself and how I've deciphered it. And we'll see some interesting inscriptions, and then we'll talk a little bit about why I believe this is why this is can be mathematically said to be the correct decipherment. So the Indus civilization, as you guys know, is one of the oldest civilizations, one of the largest civilizations. It started somewhere in what is today Haryana, in either Birana, Rakhigarhi, those areas. It spread along the Saraswati River. You see a lot of these black dots on the right here. I don't know if you can see my pointer. And then, it spread to the whole valley. The area that is shaded on the left map, this area used to be a savanna. It used to be a grassland about 7,500 years ago, so around 5,500 BC. And then due to the change in climate, the monsoon shifted, and that area became a desert. And it became it desertified slowly, but the people had wells, and the waters also flow underground. As you know, rivers also flow underground, and they had wells, so they could survive for a while. But eventually, it became so desertified that they started moving to sites closer to the Himalayas, where there are perpetual glacier-fed rivers. That is what you see there in the red clusters near the Himalayas. That is essentially the sites moving there. The sites in the desert start getting abandoned, and eventually even Gujarat becomes very dry, and you see sites only near the Himalayas. So the abandonment actually starts around 2500 BCE, because Kalibangan, which is a very important site, is abandoned around 2500 BCE. So that's kind of is very close to the 4.2 kilo-year event and the change of the monsoon. And in some places it was just not viable to stay in that site. You had to move because there was no water. Okay, so they would move and to a nearby site and create a new site. So this is why you see some sites that are relatively close to the old site, and when the old site is abandoned, almost right after you see a new site. So one good example is Mehergarh and Nausharo. They are very close. They're just they just moved closer to the river. So in this last map you see in Haryana, those are sites up to 700 BC. 2700 before present is around 700 BC, and this is the region where the Mahabharata war, the Vedic composition, all the Puranas, a lot of these are centered in this region. And this region has been continuously occupied from something like 7000 BC to 700 BC. Okay, so really 6.5 millennia, you have an uninterrupted culture in that area. On the right, there's just this, I've shown this in other presentations. This is just a very, very long drought with a couple of short pauses. But imagine almost no rain for 90 years. In California, we didn't have rain for like 5-6 years, and people were kind of panicking. And just extend that, how exponentially desperate you need to be, and you will be forced to leave your home and find something else. So that's what happened. And what happens after 700 BCE, or it starts at around 800 BCE, is you start getting the Janapadas. So Janapada only means just a republic, like there's no king, or it's elected. Elected government. Not everyone had the right to vote, but the tribal heads or the family heads would vote and decide, who's running the show. And this period, we have archaeological continuity of expansion all the way to the south and to the east. On the right, you see, actually what you see, those dots are megalithic monuments. Megalithic culture was, it was contemporary with the mature Indus civilization. From 2600 BCE, you have megalithic culture. You also have the OCP culture, the ochre-colored pottery, or what's called the copper hoard culture. So all of these cultures were contemporary. And they kind of were in contact, because some OCP, some of the artifacts have Indus script on them, or Brahmi Indus mixed script on them, and southern almost all the megalithic, or at least a large number of them, have Indus graffiti, so Indus-based graffiti. So this was the script was essentially, it was all over. So it was not confined only to one region. We know from the migration patterns that although the script originated in the Northwest, it eventually went to all these other places, and people, we know that people carried it. So this is a slide I put in one of my first presentations, where I was just comparing the writing from different civilizations, and I said the earliest seems to be Harappa from 3500 BC. This date was given by a professor, I think, of Harvard, who was supervising a dig in Harappa. So in Harappa, they found this potsherd, which shows letters that are already, abstracted. So they're not the oldest form. They show signs of evolution. So based on that, I guessed that writing may be earlier, it may have started earlier, based on how long it takes time, it has taken other writing systems to evolve to that level of abstraction. What I did not know at that time was that the writing had already started in around 4000 BC. These are called graffiti because you really can't read them. You only see what looks like pictures. But even here, we see signs of abstraction. So for example, number 21 is like an arrow or something like that, and is abstracted, which you can see in number 2. So the signs are fairly similar. If you look at the on the sides of this, this screenshot that I've cut from the paper, you see that these signs already existed, and we don't actually know. We don't have enough inscriptions to know what the original writing system was. Was it logographic? Was it, just, were they just marking things Like in Sumerian, they were just saying, okay, this is fish, this is bales of grain or something like that. So we don't know how it started. We do know that once we can start reading it around 3500, it is already it's already uniform in its character. So these are a couple of examples that I feel are the key inscriptions in terms of its early history. So the upper one is inscription seal from Tigrana or Tigdana in Haryana. Again, remember, this Haryana is where the oldest sites, the largest sites, the longest continuous presence, all that exists. And this seal has been dated to 3000 BCE. And this is unique in that they have filled the carved area with some black, either ink or soot or something like that. So maybe they were using that for impressions. And the seal below that is from Kunal, which is also Haryana. And this doesn't have writing, but it has the black buck motif. So black bucks define the Aryavarta, the region fit for sacrifice. And this motif is a very common motif in many Indus sites. Okay, so they essentially had so it was like their national icon or their cultural icon, and they kind of all have, and it's a lot of times it's two black bucks, so it's the land of the black bucks. This is a timeline of various things we have found. This is not complete. There are plenty of other things, and these dates are approximate because I wanted to give you a feel of the timeline rather than give exact dates. So Balakot graffiti, which we saw, that's from 4000 BC approximately. The actual culture is 4200 BC to 3800 BC, something like that. In Ravi, we see graffiti at around 3700 BC. We start seeing some inscriptions at 3500 BC. The oldest inscribed seal which you saw is around 3000. And then mature phase, you have the bulk of the inscriptions between 2600 and 1900. Okay. A copper anthropomorphic figure from OCP has mixed Brahmi Indus inscriptions that has been tentatively dated to 1800 BC. So there was some objections by B.B. Lal that how can there be Brahmi, because in those days it was believed Brahmi has no connection to Indus script. Vikram Khol is a cave where there are what looks like an evolved or variant forms of something in between Indus and Brahmi, and that's in the eastern India. Bedwarka is there's some inscriptions, and there's some Indus iconography like the three-headed, the horse and the unicorn and so on. Adichanallur in South India. This is now way to the south. Remember the map, people started moving to South India around this time. There is a mixed Indus and Brahmi inscription in 1000 BC. Okay. In Janapada coins, we start seeing Indus symbols and around 800 BC. Kiladi is a big site in South India, which has Indus symbols, Brahmi symbols, mixed Indus Brahmi inscriptions, and so on. Anuradhapur is in Sri Lanka, and it has the oldest Prakrit inscription in Brahmi. Okay. Then, after 300 BC, we come into what's the historical age for Brahmi. We see, we start seeing Ashoka's inscriptions and so on. Okay. Marungur is a site in South India which has mixed Indus Brahmi inscriptions. Okay. Now, throughout all this period, from 2600 BC, when megalithic period starts, there is Indus graffiti in all these burials. Now, what is Indus graffiti is that what B.B. Lal said is that more than 94% of these derive from Indus symbols. So essentially, it is people writing the symbols in their individual stylistic ways. It's not always readable, but you can say that, hey, this is this is essentially derived from, this other Indus symbol and so on. Okay, because graffiti essentially, so Indus seals were very carefully carved. They were very prized. It took a long time to prepare them, to carve them and prepare them. But the graffiti is just for burial. They write something and they put the ashes and they bury it. So and you only get some potsherds, so you're not able to actually read all of them. But what you do know is that script or that writing system existed till 500 CE. So the last entry, the Gupta seals are essentially, there are many Gupta seals where it's all Brahmi. It's actually a later form of Brahmi, but occasionally you see the old Indus form of signs. The signs are in a very archaic form. Okay, so this is essentially the timeline, and it's you can say that it's a continuous use and slow evolution to Brahmi. Okay. So these are just some of the examples. I wanted to also give you a pictorial view of what any of these look like. So on the left is the Indus graffiti, and if you are familiar with Indus signs, you will recognize some of the signs there, or that these are derived from those particular signs. In the center is Kiladi in Tamil Nadu, and they have shown that, hey, these are the signs we found on the potsherds, right? And the last one is the Chandraketugarh, that's in Bengal, and they found coins with Indus symbols on it, and a lot of them are essentially probably just Maurya coins. Maurya coins, as everyone knows, has plenty of Indus symbols on it. I made other videos on that. Please watch my other videos. I don't want to repeat the same thing in every video. It's it's distracting. Again, these are Indus symbols in far-flung places. You see a couple of Indus symbols in Qutub Minar. These, when you reuse the stones, they just placed it randomly, so they're all tilted. A couple of them are Gupta Brahmi as well. The Bijar Kamcho that is in Western Iran. That's close to close to Armenia, and that is a mixed Brahmi Indus inscription. Betdwarka, as you know, is this is one of the most recent inscriptions. This is already changed to a little bit of Brahmi, and you have to it's kind of evolved a little bit in their direction as well. So, and I said, it's not Indus artifacts are not limited to Indus Valley. You see them in Central Asia. This Altin Tepe, which is again in that region between Iran and India, Iran and Afghanistan. You see them in Central Asia, and you even see them all the way to, this is Mesopotamia. So Mesopotamians imported the technology, and some of the inscriptions are the same as Indus inscriptions. In other words, they are the same, the same language or same content, but many are completely different. These, some of these patterns are very unique, and the conjecture was that these are written in the local Mesopotamian language. So any decipherment would, read these in a different language. So, the Indus problem is, the Indus script problem is essentially not that it's not been deciphered, it's been deciphered too many times in too many different ways. And they're not falsifiable in the sense that there is no way to, if someone shows a, like Mahadevan or, I don't want to name a lot of people, but, when they say, hey, look, this is a city, this is, this is chicken. Well, you have to ask yourself, why is it not a partridge? Or, why is this not an egg or a chair? If you just make a claim saying that this represents, this particular abstract sign represents a thing, and based on that, I'm going to read it. The fact is, anyone could read it in any way, right? And no one is smarter or better than the other. There is no basis to prove or disprove it. And also, it's not reproducible in the sense, if you tell someone else to read it, he will read it, completely differently. So there is no way to derive the, decipherment. And most of them can read only short inscriptions. This is another problem. So, Parpola has, I think, has about a dozen decipherments of length 2. And that is because, if you read something as nouns, you get adjective noun, and then what? It's hard to have a sentence with 17 adjective nouns, right? So that's the issue. The other thing is the classification of the signs. They're classified variously by different people. 360, I think, Parpola, 700 plus by Wells and Fulls. And it's fairly arbitrary. In the cuneiform, they use a tool. So if someone creates a sign and someone else creates a same sign, that you can tell they're exactly the same. One person may have pressed it harder or whatever, but it's just fairly obvious they're the same. Indus signs are hand carved, so there is some variation in every instance. Okay, so one may be larger. One of them may have fish maybe have longer fins. One fish, you can't really tell what exactly is the boundary of what a sign is. Okay, so but I think Mahadevan has done a good job. He's classified to 417 signs, and most papers take that as kind of the standard. One, because it's right in the middle. It's not too small. Like I think SRO said there's only 20 signs, or it's not too large. Like it's not 700 or 900, something like that, which is pretty odd. So let's talk about what decipherment is and what it means. So decipherment essentially is you have a message in a known language in an unknown script, and you are trying to figure out what the message is. Okay, that is decryption. And decipherment is you also recover the key. The key is essentially the mapping of the message symbols into your language symbols. Okay, so in this example, and the way it works is always the same. So regardless of what people talk about, it always works exactly the same. It's called a cryptogram approach, and essentially you guess, or you start with one word, and then you gain insight into what are the pre-solved symbols in other words in the message. So in this example, I have guessed millennium, and I can guess that because that particular pattern is very unique in the English language. Only the word millennium has those 2 repeats in the center and has the same first and last letter. Okay, it's very, very unique. I'll show that. I'll go through the whole thing in, I'll try to demo this as well. So if you solve this word, then you get all these other letters in these other words. And if you look at words with 2 letters or 3 letters, you can kind of guess what it is. Long words, like, in the second word, you can kind of guess it's minutes, so that way you get more and more letters, and you just keep repeating until you've solved all the letters. This is essentially how decipherment works. So this is what it would be like. So it's called a cryptogram, and it's called the cryptogram method. Okay. So the first, how do you get the first word? The first word itself. I guessed millennium, but how do you get that in a script you've never seen? So one possibility that a lot of people talk about is called the Rosetta Stone. So this was how the Egyptian hieroglyphs were deciphered. There was an inscription with in 3 different scripts. Hieroglyphs. There's an old, there's a Egyptian script called Demotic, and it was in Greek. So they could kind of guess, oh, okay, this is the king's name and this and that, whatever. And you can, once you get that, as Steve calls it, entering wedge, then you can it will just like dominoes, you'll get one of the other. Okay. In linear B, Michael Ventris guessed that there's a certain sequence of characters that occur only in that particular island, and that it must be the name of that island. And then from that, he was able to solve all these. They say linear B was solved without a Rosetta Stone, as if, but essentially all the Rosetta Stone does, it gives you that entering wedge, and it gives you confirmation that the message you have read is correct, because the same message is in an already known script. Okay. But as far as the method itself, it doesn't change. You start somewhere, and then you just keep repeating that cycle and find, you go through the message until you discovered all the values. So what are the messages, other than linear B? Are there other decipherments that have occurred, without a Rosetta Stone or something like this? Yes, this happens all the time. And these are 3 examples I have of inscriptions or, scripts that have been deciphered using purely a cryptography. On the left is what's called the Copiale cipher. This was a codex. Codex is just, it's a book that has, things written on it. And it was unsolved for a long time. And someone recently, I think about a few years ago, deciphered it. And the way they did that was they figured out that this was a German text. And the way they figured out it was a German text was that in the margin, in one of the binders of the book, in one of the, someone had written the name Philipp in a German spelling. So they said, okay, let's try German. And they, essentially they did a bunch of permutations and assigning different values, and then they're ready to crack it. In the center is the cipher of Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary. So in the ciphers are actually pretty old. They go back to Julius Caesar, who had a very simple cipher, and then they got more and more complex. So Mary, Queen of Scots was, she had a cipher, and she would use that cipher to communicate with her trusted advisors. That was intercepted. When she was imprisoned, it was intercepted. The message was intercepted. And when enough messages were collected, they could decipher it. And they could not only decipher it, but they could also write messages with that same code. And that's how the assassination plot was discovered. They wanted, she gave the okay to assassinate Queen Elizabeth I. And then the Elizabeth's advisors, or the head of security, wrote a message in this code to find all the collaborators, and they were all killed. I mean, so that's essentially how it works. So if you get enough messages, they don't have to be in the same message. As long as the mapping, as long as the key is the same, you can decipher anything if you have enough volume of the text. Excuse me. And the last thing on our right is the Zodiac cipher. So Zodiac was a serial killer, and he sent messages announcing who is going to kill and so on. So there was a message called message 340, which had 340 characters. That was cracked by amateurs. Okay. And it was a brother-sister group, or a team. And using notes, they realized it's what's called a homophonic cipher. A homophonic cipher essentially is just more than one symbol, in the source maps to the same symbol in the text, as to defeat frequency analysis. Okay, so frequency of letters is not uniform. Some letters occur more often than others, and if you just sort the letters by frequency, you can kind of guess what it could be. But so one of the things that happens in cryptography is that when there are more letters, when there's more frequency of a certain letter, you assign more symbols to it, so that the output has kind of the same frequency for all symbols. And even Queen Mary's cipher had that, actually. So it's an old technique. So Zodiac sent another cipher. He split it into 3 pieces and sent it to 3 different places, to newspapers and so on, different newspapers. But that was also solved recently. The 408 was solved recently using computers. Okay, and it's just by because there are patterns. These are the patterns and of the words, like they have certain adjacencies, and using various a computer can try this tens of thousands of times a second. So they did a few, I think 100,000 or so, and they figured it out. So the question is every script decipherable? In other words, is the Indus script decipherable? Is every script decipherable? And that's, yes, it can be. And that has a small requirement. One is, of course, you need to know the language. The second is you need a sufficiently long corpus, right? The number of, if there's only like 4 letters, or if there's only, depending on the script, if there's only like 100 letters in the whole corpus, then you cannot. For example, for English, if there's like 30 letters, there's a very good chance you will decipher it. But because English is an alphabetic script, and it's 26 letters. But as the number of signs increases, and if the script is like a syllabic script, you're going to need a lot more, and you need some more than that to fully recover the key. Okay, and that is because certain words, you can guess even if you haven't fully recovered the key, but to be very sure about the key, it's a slightly longer distance, and by distance it means the size of the corpus, and the technical term for this is unicity distance. And all of this stuff is it's very well known. All of this theory is from 1945. This is by some person called Claude Shannon. Is a very famous person in information theory. He essentially did. Hold on, my mouse is not moving. Okay, so Shannon is essentially the father of information theory, and everything you do on your computers today is thanks to this particular paper, which describes how much information you can compress into a channel, and so all of that. And one of the key pieces in his 45 paper is the analysis of cryptograms. This paper was considered national security, importance. It was classified, and another paper was published in 1948 without this cryptogram analysis. Okay, so that had all the signaling and all this other information, but it didn't have the analysis of decipherments. Eventually, the U.S. government got other encryption systems that were more efficient. So remember, this was 45, 48. The computers there was no real thing called computers at that time. They had machines, and but once they had particularly the data encryption standard and some of their essentially it was a lot more practical to use computers to create more complex cryptography. They declassified the 45 paper. Okay, so what does it say? The formula is actually pretty simple to understand. Every cryptogram, which is to say every message that is written in a unknown script, has a unique solution at k by d characters, the size of the key, which is to say, for example, in like English Latin alphabet, you have 26 keys. If you map one to the other, you can do that in 26 factorial, right? 26 into 25 into 24. So that would be the size of the key. And redundancy is essentially how many, how much of the information is excess. So 0.7 means that 70% of the letters in English are redundant. You can guess it from the remaining 30. And this is broadly true for all natural languages. Okay. So approximately, for Indus script, if you take Sanskrit as a language, it's approximately 920. So 35 is the number of phonemes, and 35 factorial is a 452 is so 417 is the signs, and I found that they reuse the signs for the civilians, and so I've adjusted that for it. So the question is, can you decipher it as an incorrect language? Can I decipher this as, Greek, for example? And the answer is no. And the reason is that language has something called phonotactics. So phonotactics is that certain, actually, let's see if I can share that. All right. So essentially, every language has a particular pattern that has phonotactics, which means you cannot, for example, there are no words starting with mapa in Sanskrit. In fact, there are very few words that start with the voiced consonant and are followed by the corresponding unvoiced consonant, right? So, like you're not going to have ja, cha, right? Or you're not going to have daka, and so on. So there's the space, the symbol space, which is to say, if the first symbol is 35 possibilities, the second is, together, the first and second is 35 to 35, the third is 35 to 35 to 35. That number explodes very quickly and becomes so large that it becomes, much, much larger than the number of words in that language. So most of that symbol space is empty. There are non-words. And the actual words occupy a very small amount of space. So in this by the way, is from Shannon's paper. He's just showing that in a language, in a particular made-up, experimental language, these are the legal words. Okay, and this means that in a different language, it would have a completely different graph. You won't be able to trace out the same path, even if you reassign the values to those edges, the letters. Even if you change those, even if you reassign the values, you're not going to find the particular pattern that you have in a different language. So you won't be able to solve a large enough corpus in one language as a different language. In fact, you can't even solve it in the same language as a different message. So in other words, long cryptograms have unique solutions. So, let's start with the basics. Is this actually even a script? Could it just be some kind of scrolling or a design or some kind of, business logo or a family crest, or, is it really language? And is it a script? And if it's so, what kind of script? So the fact that mixed Indus Brahmi inscriptions exist, and they exist all over the subcontinent and all the way from Iran to really Vietnam, is a good indication that it is a script. This by itself is sufficient that it is a script. So I've shown some examples here. The top right is from Marungur, and you people who are familiar will see the first two letters are Tamil Brahmi, that is A and Ma, and the next two are not Tamil Brahmi. So the third is actually is Ha in Ashokan Brahmi. The letter Ha doesn't exist in Tamil. So it is very clearly a Sanskrit word. And then you have a Indus symbol at the end. So Amahas is a Sanskrit word which means power or greatness. Okay. In this center, bottom center is the OCP, the copper hoard object, which has a which has an inscription on it. And that inscription is a mix of Brahmi and Indus. Okay, there's a couple of Indus symbols, most of them are Brahmi. And from the Brahmi symbols, we know that it's a Sanskrit inscription. Okay. And this repeats with every single mixed inscription. They're always in Sanskrit. And they have Brahmi and Indus script mixed in them. So this suggests that the inscription is the Indus script is a script. Indus signs are a script, and the script is probably something like Brahmi, like it's an Abugida. And so essentially it doesn't have to be exactly Abugida, but it's a good indication that it is, because some of the signs are in between. Some of them are, the second evidence that it could be Sanskrit is if you see that seal in the middle, H150A, it has it has a triple repetition of the same sign. So in most languages, there's very few languages where you're going to have three same syllables or letters that are in any kind of word. But in Sanskrit, that's common. So in Sanskrit, there's something called a lit lakara, which is analogous to a perfect tense, something that's happened in the past and happened completely in the past. And it uses reduplication of the first syllable. And when there is a root which has the same first letter and the second letter, you can get 3 letters. So for example, judge is a root which means fight, and its lit would be jajaja. Same thing, la la la, sa sa sa. These are all valid words in Sanskrit. Okay, they are valid conjugated words. Therefore, this is an additional evidence that this script is, it's syllabic and it's Sanskrit. Okay, so now in addition to that, we have inscriptions in cuneiform, and cuneiform is, it's already deciphered. There's no, it's not a controversial thing here, where they have names of meluhans. Meluha is how Sumerians referred to Indus Valley. So Meluhans traded with, Sumerians traded with Meluhans, and they imported water buffalo, peacock, ivory, carnelian, all of these things that are made in Indus Valley and nowhere else. The sum total of the trade, and it is by ship, there is only one place, and that is Indus Valley. So Meluha is, I think it's pretty much unanimous that it refers to Indus Valley. Now, Meluha is also a name of a person in the Sumerian inscriptions. So the names of and the words in Sumerian inscriptions that refer to things and people from the Indus Valley are here, given in Sumerian. Those are just the names of the cuneiform characters. And Meluhan, I have written it in Sanskrit. And they have, they all these are attested names. Okay, these are names. Actually, these are names from classical Sanskrit era. And most of these inscriptions are from around 2200 BC, which is bang in the center of the mature Indus phase, where most of the inscriptions are from. So you can, this is a clear indication that the language of the Meluhans or of the Indus Valley is this particular kind of Sanskrit. Okay, it is essentially close to, I don't want to call it classical Sanskrit, but it is post-Vedic. It is all these names, Nana, Samara, these are names that are attested in later literature, not in the Vedas. Okay. Now Meluha itself, it is a perfect name in like if you pronounce it as Mela, remember they're writing it in their script. If you pronounce it as Mela, it is a name of a person, and Mela or even Mela can be the name of a country as well. Okay. Now, so what kind of script is it? As we said, we think it's Abugida. There's one more piece of evidence. People ask, how can it be Abugida if there are so many symbols? In the oldest layer, there are only about 71 signs. Okay, so this is a paper by Ayumu Konosukawa. I think I hope I'm pronouncing it right. And what kind of script fits in 71? Some syllabic or Abugida. That's it. It won't be. I mean, it could be something less than that, but it cannot be something like a logographic, which requires 1,000 or more symbols. So now let's look at the direction of writing. This also again is unanimous, but I'm just showing you the evidence. So this is determined by different kinds of evidence. The first is what's called external evidence. External means it's external to the meaning and content of the text itself. So for example, here in the first sign here from Banwali, they start writing it boldly, and then what happens is as they run out of space, they have to kind of squeeze it upwards. So there are many samples like this, and I'm sure you've seen them. And it's not just the seals, it's also inscribed objects. So in the center is a copper object where they ran out of space for this large sign, so they kind of squeezed it. You see, when they started, they left a lot of space on the right. When they put those 3 lines, they left a lot of space. But when they come close to the edge, they run out of space, so they have to squeeze in the letters. So this is one. The other is from examining the manner in which the letters have been inscribed, the angle in which they have held the tool. When they overwrite something. So all of these suggest that it's from right to left. But what really clinched it was the internal evidence. So internal evidence is essentially the information content of the inscription itself. So when they had same inscription in 1 line and 2 lines, they saw that it could only be possible if this was read from right to left. Okay. So there's one more mathematical paper when they did an analysis called the Gini coefficient, where it was seen that the Indus script is very strongly right to left. Okay, so you see as opposite to the Russian, where it is more likely to be left to right. So now let's come to the question of how many signs there are, what's a sign, how, at what point we're going to consider something a different sign. And some people, some researchers are pretty adamant that every little variation is its own sign. Okay, if if the arms are at a different angle, it's a different sign. If the legs have more than one, if the tail has more than extra tuft, it's a different sign, and so on. But human cognition doesn't work like this. Okay, so for example, if I were to tell you that on the first row on the left there, the first one is pa, the second one is ga, the third is ra, and the last one is sha. And I tell you to come back tomorrow and tell me which is which, you are going to forget. The mapping of the letters has to be very simple, and it has to be very obvious and clear. Otherwise, it defeats the purpose of having a script. This is just basic epigraphy, okay? So given that, now if this was a tool system, then you could kind of argue for it, but this is a hand-carved system. It's like claiming every person's handwriting is a different sign. Like if I write an A and you write an A, someone else looks at it 100 years later and says, well, there's a different sign. That's essentially what's happening. But human cognition works on entire shapes, and it works on the differences. It works on what is the essence of that sign. Okay, so to a human, it would all look the same. For example, these are 4. So let's look at the bottom here. That's like a comb sign. And you are not going to remember, or you're not going to create a system where if there are 4 teeth up to the comb, it means something. And if there are 8 teeth, it means, if there are 5 teeth, it means something else. You're not going to want to look at it and count. You're going to want to look at it and immediately know what this means. So that level of sensitivity to classifying signs is just impractical. So now these are just 2 or 3 signs. Imagine I have hundreds of these, and I expect you to come tomorrow and remember which is which. It's just not going to be possible. Okay. So then some people propose that, hey, they are actually the same sounds, but based on these little variations, they are like mama, mommy, moo, whatever. And I think Steve made this. Actually, at least Steve's was the first time I read it in one. I think it's 2010 paper that in this bottom right inscription, you have 3 fish signs, one after the other. Can it be mommy, moo? I mean, is there any word in any language that you can pronounce like this? It's unlikely. So these are just artistic variations at the most, and nothing more. So the other evidence for that is, you see when there's a composite, when that we have 2 or more characters together, they have very few occurrences. If you look at the top right there, that square with a notch in it, most of them don't have those other things hanging around them, the other appendages. So it is more likely that the majority is the sign, and the others are variants that occur. They're not independent signs. They're just they ran out of space and attached something to it. They ran out of space for the full sign, so they squeezed something in. Okay, and this you see all over. The basic sign is the sign. Variants are just individual variants. No one is going to create a again at the bottom, no one is going to say, hey, let's create a sign with 3 lines as something else and 4 lines as something else. It's just, you're not going to remember which is which. Okay. So when you decipher, how are you going to know which sign is which? How do you know that you have discriminated them properly? And the way that happens is when if you, for example, in the top left there, if the signs are actually the same, but the signs are different, but you thought they're the same. When you do a search for a match, you're going to get you're not going to get a common letter for it. So here, for example, the sign with the, there's a tree sign with the branches, shows up as bhatti. This is the only match you get. And for the jar sign, you get only these other signs. Okay, na and ya and la. So because they don't have any common signs, common sounds, it's distinct. They are different distinct signs. In the second row there, you have what looks like different signs, but they result to the same value. So they are just allographs. Okay. So there are numeric signs on the Indus inscriptions. Now, are they numbers? So we know how Indus denotes numbers. They denote it with these concentric circles. So that's at the bottom left, there is a dice that's used in games, like, the gambling games that in the Mahabharata, they use rectangular dice. Indus also has square dice, but they all have these concentric circles. This is how they mark numbers. And on the bottom right, there is some kind of counting instrument. The numbers are in that way. And they also have seals using these numbers. Okay. So if they wanted to have a seal, if they want to put 4, they would use this one. Okay. And they have for 3, 4, a few other numbers. So it's unlikely that the actual numeric signs represent numbers. And this is trivially falsifiable. You won't be able to read any of these as numbers. So there are inscriptions with only numbers, like 3 and 2. How are you going to read it? You can't read it as 32 because then you have this signs with 12 marks. So it's not a decimal system. And like the top left there, you have you have a lot of these numbers and you have 2 things in between. So it doesn't make sense to, I have written on this in detail, and this is for a different talk, but it's many researchers don't believe that these represent numbers because numbers have different representation, and the pattern of occurrence is not consistent with numeric use. Okay. So how do you decipher the signs? So we talked about earlier how you get an entering wedge, you get one value, and you just use that in the second one, and so on. So this is essentially the this is the row. This is the progression of how I deciphered it one by one. The first one is it's a 3 cups, and when you look in the dictionary, you get only 1 match. Okay, but I added these 2 other matches because the dictionary doesn't have all words. So remember, I talked about this ja, and those words are not in the dictionary. Okay, because those are conjugated forms, and literally every root has I think some 2,000 something conjugated forms. Okay, I don't remember the exact number, but it's more than 1,000. So I needed I needed to use those other data points as well. The last one essentially is that you have this sign at the terminal. So it's essentially some kind of accusative marker, right? And that is the only accusative marker that you can put it in a sequence of 3 is un. Okay. And then so for once you have un, you can get the stick sign below that, right? Using other inscriptions. And once you have those 2, you can get the sign. Okay. And from that you can get the next sign, and so on, and you can get most of the signs one by one. Okay, and so here we have not guessed what something looks like. What is its, is this a jar? Is this a cup? Is this a palm of somebody's hand? Is it a stick? Is this a rod? Is this we just don't know. We don't care, because the moment you start with this is what it is, you are kind of stuck to 2 or 3 different values. And then if you're wrong in one of them, it's not self-correcting. You're kind of stuck. And this is what happened with Mahadevan and Parpola and so on. They assume that these values are, whatever. And other inscriptions became unreadable. So for example, Mahadevan, he had this, he called something ruler, and he called something chicken, and something he called bearer. But if you pick a different inscription and substitute those values, it can become something like chicken jar rule bearer. Okay, chicken jar rule bearer is it's not a meaningful term. So he could decipher only a small quantity of signs. So as long as you don't attach meaning to the signs during decipherment, you can find the sound values. Okay, so using this, I found variants of about 118 or so signs, and some of them are just slightly different from another. Okay, so before we go there, what happens if one of the signs is wrongly determined? What happens is, as I said, you won't be able to match further. You will be able to match one or two, but many of these inscriptions just won't match. So, for example, if I have welcome and the L was incorrectly determined to be X or K or something like that, it just won't match. So, or it would, if I, it would force a break there. So, somewhere next to the bad letter, there'll be a break. And so if you find that a particular letter always causes a break or mostly causes a break, then it's an incorrectly decoded sign, right? Or it results in dead ends most of the time. And of course, you get nonsensical results, right? Like if you get, dog earth, something like that, dog earth jump or something like that. It's something wrong there. One of the letters is wrong. So you can take all those bad inscriptions or the bad results and intersect them and find what sign is common in all of them. And then okay, this is the bad one. And you can look at that again. Okay, so it's kind of self-correcting. So people ask me, okay, how do you know yours is the correct decipherment? There are like 100 of them. Mine is the only one that has read beyond the unicity distance. So mathematically, this is the only one that's correct. And this also implies that there's no other correct decipherment. Okay, that's just a property of information theory. The second is we've been able to reconstruct the names of the signs of almost all the signs, right? So so when you look at something, if you look at the dictionary for something that looks like it, with that starting with that sound, you definitely get it. So that's reconstruct. The names can be reconstructed. This is a full decipherment. Every sign has been deciphered, and except for some signs that have very few attestations, we have a high degree of confidence that these won't change. This is programmatically reproducible. So I have a program. I'll try to demo it after this piece. It's less than 100 lines, and this reproduces the result up to about half the signs. Okay, and I've purposefully written it as simple so that people can understand the code. The actual manual decipherment takes a little bit of nuance and flexibility that this simple program doesn't have. But the method is so simple that it can be reproduced with less than 100 lines of code. Okay. We found the allographs. We can show Brahmi evolved from Indus. We see the scribal traditions into Brahmi. So what does this mean? So there are certain things that that you have to do in Indus inscriptions because they're so small. You are forced to do certain things, like you rotate a few signs to save space. You omit the anuswara at the end, that at the end, because it takes a whole sign. The same thing carries into Ashoka's Brahmi inscriptions. Now in Brahmi, the anuswara is a dot; it doesn't take any space, and you're writing on a pillar, not on a seal. You wouldn't care, but they have that there as well, because these, and it's not just this one. There are many writing habits or the scribal habits that have carried from Indus to Brahmi. Okay. So this inscription can read Sumerian and Akkadian as well. So it's not just a one language thing. The Mesopotamian seals, many of them cannot be read as Sanskrit, but they can be read as Sumerian and Akkadian. And I think, the longest 50 inscriptions can be read grammatically and meaningfully. I think this is kind of important. If you can read only short inscriptions, you will never know it's true or not. Okay, so this is what I mean by reconstructing the names of the signs. So, so this is an obsolete, picture. But for example, the squirrel, it's why it's because it looks like that. So we are able to do that. You can read the full thing in the paper. I don't want to go through every sign. So some of the things were verified later. Like in the center here is I chopped off a little for spacing, but there's an elephant with its tusk. It's charging, and you see that as a sign below here, right? So that's a I got it as ma, and that's the other thing. Most signs, most of the names, they're very close to each other. It is as if they've been mispronounced, and it led to a allograph that offers a different sign that almost sounds the same. So this is for Matsya, and this is Madaramasta, and so on. It's all. So one of the other things on the left here, I've heard some decipherments claim that this is composite. It's a it's a circle and X inside. X is an independent sign, circle is an independent sign, and they claim that this is a kind of composite. I don't believe so, because you have the Indus wheel there painted. That's a design on the wheel. That's all. It's just a wheel. And the composite stuff doesn't happen in isolation. It generally is a system-wide thing. Okay. So to say that these three letters are some kind of composites is usually not true. Another example of a composite argument was this. It's that the plant or tree in a circle is a kind of composite. That's not true, because there are many renditions where it's very clearly a seed. Okay, because it is a pointed thing. There's no way a wheel or circle can have a point at the top. So in general, I didn't find the composite argument. So the things that are attached to each other, I call them conjunct, because it's a term that's used in Brahmi. That just means they're attached. Composite is more like it's into one whole. So I didn't want to use that term. So this is eventually some of the obvious things I noticed was the, were, and so on are exactly the same. So I wondered if they could all be the same. Could it all be related to Brahmi? And we also saw the mixed signs, and it turns out, yeah, the systematically derived signs deciphered one behind the other in a chain end up showing that essentially Brahmi and this is almost the same. When I showed this to some people, they said, which is Brahmi and which is Indus? It is that close. So, so we'll go into what is some of the writings. I don't want to go into a lot of this, because this requires other episodes, and it requires a discussion with someone like Steve. We can pick up some of these inscriptions and discuss them in future shows. But I just want to show you that this is the famous Yajur Veda signboard. So this is a physically large inscription. It's, I think, 2 or 3 meters, and it was meant to be hung from a wall. It's made of gypsum. So gypsum, as glows in the night. So it is meant to be seen from a distance at night. So this is, when someone says this is not a script, I'm like, why would they do this then, right? It means, Raka Vararaka Araras means diamond gem entrance. That area has always been a gem, so Vararaka is actually means chosen gem. So it later means diamond. So it really means gem of chosen gems entrance. This is just an old slide I copied. So that area was, that Gujarat area was where they did the carnelian and the jewelry and they were exporting it to Mesopotamia from 2500 something like that BC, and it's even today they're doing the same thing. It's traditional occupation. It's going on for 4,500 years. Okay, so this makes sense as their marketplace or whatever it is. One of the other things I saw was that, so when I first translated the long inscriptions, I didn't know what they meant, and during Shivaratri, people were reciting the Shiva, Sri Rudram, and it struck to me that this is essentially one of the first phrases from Sri Rudram. Yat Isho Shivatama and Yes Tamro Arno, all that stuff, right? So essentially, the Shiva is someone whose body is red, and it's asking him to calm his arrows. Okay. And there are more, references to Soma and all that stuff. And by the way, this is all grammatically correct. It's compatible with Panini. So I try not to say Panini because people say, well, Panini came later, and that's probably a valid objection. But it is compatible with his grammar. So, for example, when there is a verb that is to do with movement or what's called ablative, the verb is, the noun is conjugated in as an ablative. Okay, so things of that nature. So it's grammatically very correct. The accusatives are correct. The gender and the subject verb agreement matches. I mean, I was actually shocked when I saw this. And the names of the so that is one. That's one. The other is that once I saw that the Sri Rudram thing, I said, okay, let's try the rest of them. And all 50 of them I found have some reference to most of them to Rig Veda, one or two to Yajur Veda. Okay, some. So we can discuss some common objections that I hear all the time. The first is, well, Indo-Aryan arrived in 1500 BC. Everybody knows that. Max Muller, blah blah blah, and all this stuff. The other is, there's a 1,000-year gap between Indus and Brahmi. How can you, this and that? The recent good one I heard was that how did they start with Abugida? Okay, and I've addressed all this before, but we'll go through them. Why so many signs for each phoneme? Like, why does S have so many, so many variants? And then some stuff about genetics and how, it cannot be any kind of Sanskrit because of some genetic evidence for Aryan migration. And then a question about, well, what about someone else's decipherment? Okay, that's, how can there be many valid decipherments? Decent question. And an interesting thing was, why would they write this? Why would they write this? So we'll address all that. So this is essentially the whole AMT debate. I generally try not to get into it because, that requires a whole other, that's a good 2-3 hour discussion. Okay, but the entire AMT is based on circular argument. Okay, and I've simplified it here. It's complex enough that it fools a lot of people. But if you are able to reason through pramanas and where to start and how to accept, how to know whether something is just true knowledge or not, then you understand that it starts with an assumption. The assumption is that Max Miller's date of 1500 BC Rig Veda. So 1500 BC Rig Veda was merged with or smushed with the 800 BC Greek classics, and they created the language tree and created something called Proto-Indo-European. which was always meant to be just a model and not a real language spoken in a real place by real people. But now they assume that that's real, and they estimated the date of that to 4000 BC. And the reason they did that was they said, okay, there's some Greek inscriptions in 1700 BC on some rocks. There's Hittite in around 1500 BC. So then a new language, to create a new language, it takes about 1,000 years or 2,000 years. Okay. So if you have branches, then the minimum you would have is you have the first Proto-Indo-European. It would split into 4 branches, and those branches become more branches. So you're going to have at least 2,000 years. So they needed 2,000 years from the Hittite and Greek, and so you got 4,000. And this is bare minimum, by the way. This is in no way makes it's a sensible date, because Tamil, for example, old Tamil, Sangam Tamil, you can still read. Okay, other than some few words which are hard, you can still read it. And that's, what is it, from 500 BC? So that's 2,500 years. Tamil is still Tamil, right? So it's, some languages change faster. Like English changes pretty fast. It's been 1,000 years since the Old Norse or whatever, and anyway, so they said, okay, PI is 4,000 BC, and they said, okay, 4,000 BC, where can we find a culture that has horses and wheels in 4,000 BC? And they said it's Yamna. Okay. Then they traced all the other cultures. They found cultures on the way, how they may have moved. What's the next, neighboring culture? And then they said, well, there's 1600 BC, there's Andro. Therefore, they must have come to India in 1500 BC. So you see how the assumption is also the result. This is called a circular argument. It has enough, red herrings to fool an ordinary person, but it's fairly straightforward that it's, you can't start the conclusion with the assumption. Now, if Rig Veda is not 1500 BC, then what happens? Then the whole thing collapses because your assumption was wrong. And anyone who's read the Rig Veda knows it cannot be from 1500 BC, because the later parts of Rig Veda, like the Shatapatha Brahmana and the Upanishads, they speak about like Shatapatha Brahmana speaks about Kritika never veering from the east. And these dates on the right, they're given by Amitabha Ghosh. These are most conservative dates, by the way. I've had a talk with Vedaveer Arya, who has dates that go into much more antiquity, and you've probably heard of Nilesh Oak's dates, which go even further. So this is the most conservative dates I could find that, so that's why I put them here. So Shatapatha Brahmana date for Kritika is around 3000 BC, and a pole star, Thuban is mentioned as a pole star. Thuban was pole star also around 3000 BC, around 2800 BC. So, 2800 BC stopped being a pole star, something like that. So, and these are just 2 observations. There are many, many, many such observations that make it impossible for anything in Rig Veda to be written. Also the description of the river Saraswati. I mean, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of things which tell you that it's not possible for anything to have happened, any of this stuff to have happened in 1500 BC. It is too late, right? The flora, fauna have changed. I mean, everything has changed in 1500 BC. It doesn't match. So I don't think that this should be taken seriously. I don't take this seriously. It's just full of logical fallacies. As I said, it takes another episode for it. So let's not get too distracted by it. The other thing you see is a continuity of iconography. Okay. So this again is the Manusmriti thing, which says, the land of the black buck is the land for sacrificial acts. Okay. And the black book motif is spread throughout the Indus Valley. Okay, you see it in many places. You see in Lothal, Remandiri, Kunal, and many places all the way into South India. Okay, you see it in Adichanallur. So black buck was essentially it's like the bald eagle in the US. Okay, it's their you can call it totem or whatever, right? And you see in the bottom left here, there's a black book motif like around a circle, around a swastika, and that gets abstracted in the center thing here, and eventually it becomes a triskelion. So this triskelion is from the Kuru coin, Kuru Janapada, and it even continues into the painted graver you see on the top. Actually, the painted graver is earlier. So you see the evolution of the symbols of these dynasties, these Puranic dynasties from Indus Valley. And this is one example. There are dozens of these examples of motifs continuing from Indus Valley and becoming part of the national fabric. So there is, there's no way that somebody came and said, look, whatever you're calling this, all of these hundreds and hundreds of concepts, which are very important to you, we are going to give it a new name in our language, and you have to forget your old name, and you have to change. This is just a nonsensical thing, right? So this Kunal, by the way, is a very old site, and it's in Kurukshetra, what is today Kurukshetra. So it's a site that's occupied for a long time, and so there's continuities like this that make it impossible. And some people, the second objection I hear is, what about chariots and horses? Andrew Noah had it in 1500 BC. Well, that is, I don't know why that is an argument for anything, because you do have this in India as well. This is in Deccan, in Chalcolithic, way before Andrew Noah. And the chariot designs are, they continue from Sinoli to Kaushambi. Kaushambi is 100 BC or something like that, 100 CE. So you only see a continuity. Okay, this again is the address of the 1,000-year gap. So you only see continuity and continuity and continuity. You don't see any break. You don't see any abrupt change. So let me then address the allographs. So in Bronze Age scripts, and this is my script is actually much later than the Bronze Age. It's very common to have allographs. It's very, very common to have more than one symbol represent the same sound. So here there are 10 phonemes for the letter U. The first, what's marked as A. All of them use the phoneme U. Okay. And in the second one, there are, just like we saw for Indus script, you have different pictorial representations that represent the same sound. You have the same thing here. You have, for the sound Chan, you have sky, snake, and four, which all kind of sound similar in the Mayan language. So nothing in the decipherment is new or surprising or some kind of hack, or it's all very in line with ancient scripts. Okay. So then the genetics is another thing they try to discuss. This is a complicated thing. I don't want to go too deep into this, but the situation with genetics is a lot of people don't understand that genetic results are not algorithmic. They are statistical. So statistical means that statistically, when they say something, this is possible statistically. Okay. Now, statistics require something called fair sampling. So as an example, if I sample, say, a genetic sample of all the, I want to make a statement about the United States. And if I sample only people in downtown Baltimore, I may say, well, most people in the United States are black. But people in the United States are black. Now, what has happened is I have sampled from a small area, and I have oversampled in a small area, and in somewhere else I have sampled, fewer people of other ethnic groups. And I made a statement that so that is called a sampling bias. Okay. So now if you look at population density, this is on the left in 3000 BC, most of the population is in China and India. Okay, in the Gangetic Plain, South India. This is the most of the world's population. There's a little bit in in Europe, but if you see in the steppes, in the Pontic steppes and Kazakhstan, there's nobody. There's this very, very few people. But on the right, if you see the ancient samples, the various colors represent the various time frames. The red is actually modern times, so forget that. You see, from India, you don't have any samples. You have one sample from Rakhigarhi, that is a poor sample. Everything else is in Russia. Most of them are in Russia and Europe. So what happens in such a situation is that all results are shifted to where there are more samples. Okay, so it's fairly easy to understand, right? If it works with anything, not just genetics, it works with anything. Okay, it works with red balls versus green balls, anything you want. So that's just a methodological error in the statistics. And when they say, there's a mix, these people are can be modeled as this plus this. You have to understand that it's a statistical fit, and it doesn't mean it's the only fit. So there was a study that showed that alternative models fit in nominally are significantly better. And if people talk about p-values and all that, p-value doesn't mean higher p-value doesn't mean it's a better fit. It means both of them mean that it is better than a chance fit. Okay, so you cannot treat it as a truth claim or a fact or something like that. So there was a model I saw where a population was modeled as a mixture of A plus B. The problem was A plus B were 2,000 kilometers apart and 2,000 years apart. So you have to use archaeology as the primary evidence, and genetics you can use it for confirmation. You cannot use genetics the way it is today with the sampling and all that. You cannot use that as the primary evidence for anything at all. Okay. This is another. This is essentially the calculated ingress date into India of the step DNA, step MLBA DNA, and it's around 500 BC. So the step DNA is irrelevant to to that debate. So it's all about what evidence you pick for your narrative. So for example, I'm not making this claim, at least not yet, but I could find this story and say that, hey, look, there's a study that shows South Asian DNA in corded ware. Okay, so you see this dark blue here, that's South Asia, and you see that in corded ware DNA. Okay, and on the right you see archaeological evidence. On the left is a button from Indus Valley, which has that sun cross, and on the right is from corded ware. What looks like a cover on this button. It's a golden cover on the button. You can see that there's a flat area of the circle that goes on the edge, and you have the folded area behind, and you see the two holes for sewing the buttons. So I could claim that, from this, I could make a claim that corded ware was, had essentially influenced, or had the language of corded ware was influenced by Indians. This is this wouldn't be any different from what the claims other people are making, right? And just to show you, it's not one thing. This is Sintash Tachik pieces. Horses have those little belts that you use for riding, and they have the imagery of they have Indus imagery. Okay, and this is a very unique thing. It has meaning in Indus and Indian culture. In Sintash, nobody knows what the meaning is, if there's any meaning. They can pretend it's a solar symbol or whatever, but in it's related to horses clearly in Indus mythology. That's the unicorn horse, right? Andronov, this is a reconstructed burial. You see the jewelry worn by that woman is also supports Indus symbols. So based on this, I could make a case. I'm not gone into this, but someone could make a case that the symbol and culture of the steppes was heavily influenced by Indus Valley. Remember, just like the United States exports its culture all over the world, in those days, Indus Valley was a big exporter of culture. Right? You see Indus artifacts everywhere. So why wouldn't it be in the steppes as well? Right? And let's talk about the other decipherments. So the way I judge, or the way I give importance to decipherments, is that they have to read the long text meaningfully and grammatically. Otherwise, they still need some work. Okay, so I've not seen any other decipherment that reads the 50 longest inscriptions. So yes, they have to. So I don't normally comment on them. I say, well, let's wait till they improve to that point. Okay. Until they read beyond the Unicity distance, they're not provably correct. So what this means is, mathematically, there is always an alternative reading. Okay, either in the same language or a different language, until you read a certain amount of corpus. And if it's syllabic or abugida, it's around 1,000, 1,500. If it's abjad is, you see a lot of abjads actually. Abjad is when you have value for a symbol, but that the vowel is not really significant. So you can decode a symbol as pu, but somewhere else read as pa, somewhere else read as p. So essentially, the only substance there is the consonant, not the vowel. So that's an abjad. So the moment you structure your decipherment as an abjad, you have to read about half the corpus, about 6,000 characters, 6,000 signs. Otherwise, it's not probably correct. Okay. Yeah, let's talk about the other fallacies. There's a lot of fallacious arguments I get. I generally take that as a admission of defeat. Okay. So one thing I get is, why would they write this? Why would they write so the argument here is, if I was a Harappan, I would write something else. I would write something better. Yeah. Why is this? Why did they use this for the symbol? Why did they have multiple? Why did they rotate this sign? Yeah. So yeah, that is what it is. It's a fact. If you're trying to second guess them and say that with your 21st century knowledge you would have done it better, I mean, that's not an argument for what a Bronze Age person would do. Okay, so there's nothing really to discuss at that point. The second is it peer reviewed? Now this is not a completely bad argument, but it essentially is a appeal to authority. And what happens is, it's almost impossible to get these things published. Okay, it's not impossible, but it's very, very hard, because the moment you see Indus script, the people who will be reviewing it is about 4 people. And all 4 peoples will completely reject anything that says the Indus script is deciphered, regardless of language. Especially if it's any Indo-Aryan language, it will be automatically rejected. This is the way it is. Now, there may be other journals where these people are not referees. And it's hard to find that, because they don't tell you, these are my reviewers. Okay. So that's a situation. And, I'm not an academic. I don't really care for any kind of tenure, or, I don't need this. So, anyway, so that's the argument. And then I asked, yeah, but most people think it should be time. Yeah, it's argument by popularity, right? What is popular, must be true. So again, that's a fallacy. There's nothing to say to that. I've heard many people claim that, hey, I can follow the same steps, and I can, use a dictionary. I can get it as Arabic, Chinese, etc. So this is not true. because as I've said, the patterns of the phonotactics and the patterns and the syntax of each language is unique. You won't even find those patterns, okay, in a different language. You can do it for a small number of small corpus, but you can't do it for beyond the unicity distance, okay. You can't even do it, again, as I said, you can't do it in a different way in Sanskrit. Forget other languages. So when someone says this, it's very clear they don't understand cryptography. So there's not much to say about that either. So that's the end of the talk. I try to demo. I have to quickly demo. Let me get this. Meanwhile, I think Steve and I can discuss, and while I try to get that demo ready. Your thoughts, Steve?
Hi, yeah, that was that was great, Yajnadevam. That I really enjoyed that. I particularly enjoyed your treatment of the genetic issues, because this is something that is being used as a cudgel. I've experienced this personally. Oh, see, there's a new study that's come out that proves absolutely that these people must have had such and such genetics. And I mean, I would add to what you were saying that genetics per se doesn't prove what language people spoke. I mean, the modern day Greeks, for example, genetically would have to be largely Turkish, having been occupied by the Turks for hundreds of years. And before that, I mean, the genetic similarities between people living in modern Greece and the Greece of Homer are very different. And yet, modern Greece is demonstrably descended from Homeric Greek. So, this idea that we can use genetics as a way to unlock a decipherment, I think is tenuous. And I say that admittedly as someone who doesn't know very much about that. I would think, Yajnadevam, you dealt with the various, objections that you've heard in a very, very interesting, compelling way. I might add one more that I don't know if you've heard before, but I just ask you how you would respond if someone were to point out that the unicity distance and Shannon and all of that is specifically address the question of the interpretation of a ciphertext, which, while it has, I mean, there are some analogies with an undeciphered language. There's one very significant difference, and that is that a ciphertext is a text that has deliberately been enciphered from a plain text via an algorithm. And so the notion of unicity is designed to uncover, what that algorithm might be. Whereas presumably, there is no algorithmic, there's no actual conscious algorithm underlying any writing system, because there's no deliberate intent to create a ciphertext. So while there are, I think, a lot of similarities, I mean, it's been alleged, although I don't know that it's true. I think the latest allegations that this is not probably true, but that Michael Ventris, in addition to being an amateur classicist, was also a cryptanalyst during World War II. That apparently may not be true, but it's nonetheless the case that there are instances of cryptanalytic techniques applied. They've been applied, for example, as you, I'm sure, are aware, repeatedly to the Voynich manuscript since it was first uncovered back in World War I. But I would just point that out and wonder, what your response would be if someone were to point out, the difference between an algorithmically created ciphertext and an incidentally unreadable script.
Right. That's a good question. So yeah, so Michael Ventris, so I don't know if he's a cryptanalyst, but his decipherment was reproduced by a team using cryptanalytic techniques. And they found it to be identical except for one symbol. And when they showed it to Michael Ventris, he accepted that, yes, the cryptanalytic decipherment is correct. That symbol, what you have done is correct, and what I've done is not correct. So as far as the algorithm, the question, the Shannon's paper, which suggests that any unknown script, he actually mentions the Voynich manuscript itself, but any unknown script can be modeled as a cryptogram, is from his paper. And essentially, the algorithm is very simple. It's a mapping algorithm. So it is enciphered using a mapping algorithm, and cryptograms are essentially using unknown symbols or unusual symbols to write a text in a ciphertext. So the fact that, instead of mapping ABC to XYZ, I map ABC to some Indus symbols or emojis or anything else. It doesn't make a difference. There are cryptogram communities that do this for leisure, right? So they send each other cryptograms made out of symbols, and if you know the symbols, then you're just reading it normally. But the trick is to recover the message and the key. So all starting from Shannon itself, they all treat unknown scripts as cryptograms. So essentially, that should address that question.
Well, just to add to that, did Shannon, I've not read Shannon's paper, but did he explicitly mention sources other than the Voynich manuscript? Because it's often assumed that the Voynich manuscript is itself a ciphertext, and it's an encoded, that it doesn't represent a real writing system that, of which other specimens have lost, but instead a deliberate, encrypting of a known language. I mean, people have proposed everything from Nahuatl to Hebrew to this type of thing. So, I mean, did he address that?
Yeah. So no, I think it's a generic statement he made, like Voynich manuscript, and anyone who's familiar with cryptograms and who's created cryptograms or solved it for leisure know that as a script is essentially symbol to a sound mapping, and what the glyph looks like, whether it's uppercase letters, lowercase letters, is italic, or it's something completely different, it does not change the process of decipherment even a tiny bit, because what matters is the adjacency and the arrangement of the symbols, not what the symbols look like. So Shannon calls these residue cases, and I believe in one of your papers you call it what is it? Semiotics. So essentially, it's the information contained in the arrangement, adjacency, repetition of the symbols themselves, and not what the symbols look like. It doesn't matter. I could replace them all with numbers 001, 002. I could replace them with A, B, A, C. It will not change. In fact, under the covers, that's what the program does, right? It puts them all in a numeric index. So it wouldn't change the fact. And also, you could do this with any other language or any other script as well. It would work just the same.
Okay, well, that's great. You had something additional you wanted to show?
Yeah, I would have to restart the browser. Maybe it's not an issue because you will be online. Okay, let me actually try to do that. If it doesn't, then I'll come back this.
Okay, I await your restart.
Okay. Okay, let's try. Yeah, it wasn't too bad, was it? Right. So what I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to show the things in, as it's so far I've just spoken about it, but let's try to actually. Do you see the screen? Is it legible? I hope.
I can see it. It's mostly black so far.
Can you see the letters?
bash 5.05.
Yes, that's just the terminal prompt. Okay. So first, let me demo the what I mean by saying that phonotactics, certain patterns don't exist. Okay. So this is so the way this works is so MW text is Monier-Williams dictionary. Okay, and these are this is a regular expression. So the slashes are the the brackets. The caret is just says the beginning of the word, so we don't care about what happens in the center. The dollar says end of the word, and the dot star says anything after that. So we are trying to find all words that start with mapa, okay, to see if any exist, and they don't exist. So let's look at something we know exists. Kara exists. Kara is hand. There's many words with that. Let's look at Jacha. Doesn't exist. So this is what I was talking about, that you don't have if the first syllable is voiced and there's a corresponding unvoiced after that, you're not going to find it. Okay, so this is just so let's try Pama doesn't exist. Let's try Mapa. So most of these patterns don't exist, and in different languages these rules are different. Okay, so these are called phonotactics, and some of them, when a word is borrowed or when a word is conjugated, certain things change. Okay, so for example, bhu is so I'm just going to put bhu here. Bhu. Yeah, so I'm trying to find a word that I know exists. So let's say you have, so not all words are in the dictionary, but let's say you have a bhu and the reduplicated form is babhua. And because you cannot have two voiced aspirated at the same time, I think it's called Bregman's law. The first letter, the first syllable becomes unaspirated. So the phonotactics of a language will change, will be preserved even to defeat things like conjugation, borrowing, and so on. Okay, so that is one. So that's a small thing. But now let's try to actually decipher the script itself. So let me try to bring up also the. Let's see if Okay, I can't bring both of them at the same time. So let me try doing the first symbol. Right, we have 3 symbols. And the way you do that is you say, grab me anything that repeats twice. Okay, so dot plus says any string. Doesn't matter how many letters, I want to see it. And this is the only match. Okay, ananan. So therefore, you know that the match is un. So that's how we get the first symbol. Okay. So once we get the first symbol, we can look at the further symbols. I wish I could share more than one screen, but okay, I'll tell you what I'll do. I will open this. So this is the corpus. Okay, so this is un. Then the stick symbol, you can use this. So the one is I have assigned to un. So as I mentioned earlier, everything is converted numerically inside. We don't we don't have to work with symbols. We can just work with the residue class. So here, this is the stick sign, and what we're saying is, okay, so this is, we know that the so this inscription is a stick sign followed by 3 cup signs, okay, and you get a, okay. So this is how you can go one by one, and I had to do trial and error to find the things that isolate these individual values. Now I can go and I programmatically do this whole thing. Okay, so the source is here. This is a small shell script. It just sets things up, and essentially what it does is it gets the downloadable dictionary from Monier Williams, and it unzips it, and it removes all the spurious words, the lexicographical words that were invented in the medieval times. They're marked by L, so it removes them. And it normalizes the aspirated and unaspirated, and the sibilants, and all the various r's in the r, all of that, it changes to R because they all use the same symbol. So this is just the setup. It just creates a dictionary, and then it calls this prove. And this is less than 100 lines. This is in Perl. Unfortunately, not everybody likes Perl, but it's very useful for text manipulation. So we open that file, which we created, and all we do is we just run it through this resolver. And the resolver is very short. I purposely kept this short at the expense of flexibility. So if I put a little more effort, I can make it do the entire corp and full decipherment. But here I get to about half the decipherment, okay? Because as you get, so this was deciphered in roughly in the order of frequency. So initially it's easy, and later, there are fewer and fewer samples. So you need to craft your regular expressions a little more, with a little more nuance. So here, all this does is it, by the way, this is all open source. It's in Yajnadevam GitHub. You can, look it up. So all that does is it just substitutes those values, like it does that. So let me try something else here. If I say, for those who don't understand, if I say I want all words that start with "ba" and has one syllable after it that it has a vowel "a," this is what I get. Okay, so I can. Okay. And I restarted it. Okay, so let's do it without regexifying. Right. So this is, so you get all these letters that match it. And those as a set are remembered by the script, and when it uses the next inscription here, so whatever is captured from this first seal, possibilities here, they are simply substituted here, and you see what matches. So every match reduces a set until there's only one. It's that simple. It's very, very straightforward. So I can run the script. It seems to have lost history. Let's try that. So I'm just going to run the script, and so it's just essentially doing the same thing. You see, those are all the results, intermediate results. And these are the final values of each of the symbols. Okay. And I'll show the intermediate. So what happens is here, this inscription, it matches all these values. So when it uses in the next inscription, which is different, it just substitutes this particular thing in the parenthesis with these possibilities, and the set reduces to this. And you keep doing that until you get only one value. Okay. And that's how you get the values for each seal. So it's completely agnostic about anything except the so let me stop this sharing here. So it's completely agnostic about I'm trying to, yeah. Right, so let me share the presentation again. Okay. So essentially, that's what it is. Those are the steps, and it just does it programmatically. It just finds those patterns and put it in slideshow. It finds those patterns and it determines what the values are. And the test of that is when you substitute those in all the other values, all other inscriptions, you should be able to read all of them. So because the words used are to determine them are short, you don't have to worry about things like word boundaries. And ultimately, when you decipher long texts, if they are in if they're grammatical and they're meaningful, then it's a successful decipherment. You're muted, Steve.
Yes, I am. No, I just I can't see. Do we have anyone on the show live right now with questions or comments that they'd like to share?
Yes, let's do that. Okay, so I'm just going to say, look, these are questions about ancestry. I just want to say that I don't want to discuss genetics in this presentation because that is a very involved topic where, first of all, I don't have all the expertise. I just know enough to be troublesome. So I'm just going to ignore all the genetics questions, okay? What time do you put unified Indo-Iranian? Okay, so linguistically, I don't know, but I think the whole, if you look at the speed at which Sanskrit has evolved, it's very, very slow, and I don't think it's possible to do this. And many believe that Indo-Iranian is, the unified Indo-Iranian is. So all I can tell you is that the syntax, the argument doesn't fit. If they are Indo-Iranians, then it's it's attested in Sumerian cuneiform before they existed. So recently, I think they moved Indo-Iranian back to Yamnaya. So originally, the idea was that Yamnaya is the common culture where everyone spoke the same language. And now what has happened is they've put all language groups right there, which defeats the purpose of Yamnaya being the homeland where they spoke the one version. So it's at such a nonsensical point that there is no good answer to this. Okay, so I'm just going to skip that.
Can I just add something to that?
Yeah, please.
So, I mean, as a linguist myself, I mean, and actually someone with a fair amount of background in historical linguistics, languages do change at very different rates of speed. And it's always been vexing to me, the smug certainty that you see among certain establishment figures, archaeologists, well, we know that such and such happened at such and such time because, you know, and a lot of this is predicated on assumptions about the rate at which languages have changed. Now, you mentioned earlier Sangam Tamil. Tamil's a relatively conservative language. I mean, you know, if you know a lot of Tamil and you visit the great Chola temple at Tanjavur, for example, I mean, the inscriptions there are fairly readable, despite the fact that they were written many, many centuries ago. And this would not be the case for an untrained eye trying to read, say, Old English or Anglo-Saxon, a comparable, you know. On the other, you know, and in Indo-European language family, we find certain groups, such as Lithuanian, which is extraordinary, probably the most conservative living Indo-European language, followed closely by certain of the Slavic languages, Russian, for example. But even in the Baltic family, Lithuanian, the other surviving member, Latvian, is much less conservative. So it's dropped a lot of the elaborate Indo-European, you know, declensional forms and this sort of thing. And you see this also in the Slavic language family. So that while Russian and then OCS, you know, preserve a very high degree of the Indo-European noun cases, Bulgarian and Macedonian have essentially gotten rid of them. And likewise in the Germanic languages, German still preserves 4 noun cases. English preserves none. So there's clear, you know, some languages are more conservative than others. However, establishing a metric for a rate of speed, let's say, of language evolution is probably a fatuous pursuit, just based on the nature of languages and so forth. So, you know, a lot of these attempts to date, you know, the Rig Veda, for example, or the entry of the old theory, the entry of the Indo-Aryans into South Asia, were based kind of on these assumptions about how much more conservative the language of the Rig Veda is with respect to the other Vedas and with respect to, you know, the Sanskrit of the Mahabharata and so forth and so on, you know, and that is a really, really vexed question. It really is. So.
Okay. Was the early IVC Indo-Iranian and then becomes IVC? So from an inscription point of view, I haven't seen a single Iranian or Iranic or Indo-Iranian inscription. They have always been Sanskrit. The only non-Sanskrit inscriptions have been in Mesopotamia. So there are very few inscriptions before 3300 BC. I really cannot tell you from an attested evidence point of view. Okay. We do know that sometime during the Battle of 10 Kings, you know, sometime after that, the Iranians moved west from Hapta Hindu, which was their, you know, the name for Sapta Sindhu, to where they are currently. So that date, there are many dates for that from different scholars, but I really, so from my understanding, that occurred sometime, excuse me, sometime much before 3300 BC. So, but I have no dates on that. Steve, if you have any opinion?
Well, only to say that I really wish that they would come up with some unambiguous inscriptions from the BMAC sources, because I would not be at all surprised to find out that the BMAC is sort of a kindred Indo-Aryan or Indo-Iranian group. But, you know, absent, I mean, they found a couple inscriptions that I think turned out to be, you know, probably Chinese, you know, very early Chinese, so, or debatable. So yeah, but the BMAC is a great mystery. Certainly, I mean, I've studied a lot of Avestan, and in the Avestan, there are some tantalizing clues of the geography of the early Indo-Iranians, and they talk about, for example, Mithra, the same Mithra as Mitra in the Vedic pantheon, Mitra Varuna in particular, is one of his epithets. Is, you know, he of the broad pastures, of the broad grazing grounds, implying that the homeland of the Indo-Iranian moiety, or of the Iranian moiety, the Indo-Iranian group, was probably somewhere up in the steppes, certainly north of South Asia, but that's highly speculative.
Okay, I did actually, I think Altindepe has inscriptions, but that is much after 3300 BC, and it is Sanskrit, and it looks like it's a trade good from Indus, so it's not something from them. Okay, so this is again another So I think we can certainly do a talk on Indus in the Aryan migration thing, but here I just want to add information. Yeah, Indus cotton was found in Sintashta around 2000 BC when they just started. So there was influence from the very beginning, and no, their population was not 10,000. 10,000 was the population of the entire steppes. Sintashta was much smaller than that. Okay, and yeah, the all great or large economies are exporters. They export culture, they export material goods, and we see that we see Indus goods in Mesopotamia. We see that in steppes, and so yeah, it's not surprising. Let's see. I'm going to skip a bunch of these. Okay. Where can you find inscriptions if you want to replicate this work? So look for Yajnadevam in GitHub, and there is corpus in. So the corpus is, you can browse it on in epigraphica.de. Okay, but if you want to download it, then you can go to Yajnadevam on same as my handle on GitHub, and you find in one of the repositories you find all the inscriptions. They are in numeric form, obviously. The codes they use is the Epigraphica code. So if you want to look at the symbols, what they look like, go to Epigraphica, look at their symbol shapes and so on. And then you can try to replicate it. If you want to just run the code, my code is also there. You just have to run the code. It gets all the, it has the corpus, it gets the dictionary, and it runs it.
Yeah, just to comment on epigraphica.de, I mean, as you mentioned earlier, I mean, the number of total signs that are given and accounted for separately is, I think, far beyond what would be justified by reasonable assumptions of allographic variation. Okay,
right.
But that said, the advantage there is that you can also generate the actual image of most of the inscriptions, so that even if and you might find, as I have on a number of equations, I've communicated with Andreas, who is the creator who maintains that database, on a number of occasions said, you have actually the wrong sign for this one if you look at it carefully, and this kind of thing. But and obviously there are going to be mistakes made in a corpus of that size. But one of it's not only substring searchable, but you can also verify any result by bringing up the image of the actual object, and that's so it kind of combines the features of a substring searchable corpus, or like the old Mahadevan concordance, with the new photographic corpus prepared by Parpala et al., and it makes it all interlocked and substring searchable. So it can be a very, very powerful tool.
Yeah, I think that's very useful, and I'm actually thinking of we already started work on creating a site which has all the inscriptions, all the translations, and we'll also hopefully add the ability to write and read in this script itself. So that would be useful. We are also trying to have search by word, search by concept, search by reference, and so on. It's an ambitious project, so it may take some time, but I think it would be a useful addition to to the Indus community. Okay, one more comment. I've been trying to do, Perl. Well, you could, you can try to do it with Python. Perl is not that hard, actually. It's, I mean, if you know one programming language, you know them all. I mean, but the reason I did that was just regular expressions are just very, just part of the language itself. So, if you do it in Python, if you replicate it, that would be wonderful. I think, and if you donate the code, we can put it in the same repository. Okay. Right. So again, this is a very, very big topic. This, you can create a series of, you can create a whole series of, interviews on this out of India. It's just a very big topic. I think Thalagiri has done some groundbreaking work in the sense that he figured out the relative chronology and figured out book 6 was the earliest and so on, which gives us a lot of information. So for example, in book 6, you have ocean trade, right? And it's unlikely that if anybody came from outside from day one, they would have outside, they would be trading across the ocean when they're just entering into the Punjab, right? And a lot of things on the, the linguistics itself. I mean, maybe Steve is a better person to speak about, about this question.
No comment at this point.
Okay. One thing I would add is the Indus site itself. Sites. The fourth map there is Indus sites at 700 BCE. So anybody who came, if any steppe people came from the outside at 1500 BC or whatever, and if they went to Punjab, Haryana region where all the Rigvedic stuff happened, they would encounter the Indus Valley people. They would learn writing from them. They would learn city planning. They would learn a bunch of things, which you don't, you don't see that discontinuity. It's not possible for someone to come to that geography, do all of these things, and it not show up in the archaeological record. Okay. Because it's a continuous civilization. See, the story as it is narrated is that Indus civilization starts in 2600 BC and ends in 1900 BC. And then, centuries later, maybe 1500 BC. So after 1900 BC, everybody went back to being like pastorals or hunter-gatherers or something. They just said, we're not going to do the cities anymore. We're just gonna live in the forest or whatever, right? And then, so the argument was always about the outsiders coming in with superior technology. And it's just not true, because Indus Valley didn't stop at 1900 BC. What stopped in 1900 BC was the trade with Mesopotamia, because Sumerians stopped existing at around 2000 BC. And there was a Bronze Age collapse, and tin was discovered in Cyprus. A bunch of stuff happened that killed the trade, so they stopped making seals. They continue to make a few seals. There you still have seals that have been found at a depth of 0. Depth of 0 means it's essentially on the ground. So there were a few seals still in use, even to the end of the Indus Valley. Okay. So it is, I don't feel that the current narrative, whatever it is, both migration theory or out of India theory, I don't think they are completely thought through. And you have to understand what humanity is it's about creating a narrative to understand the past with the limited facts you have. And the facts will always be limited. It will always be incomplete. You will never know, and you'll always have conflicts. You'll always have this doesn't agree with this and this doesn't agree with this. But instead of choosing to ignore the past and pretend it does not exist, you create the most plausible narrative. And as long as there was no, political and other implications, it was fine. Nobody cared. But soon, all kinds of stuff started with the Nazi Germany, and saying we went all around the world. We made Greece, we made India, we made this, we made that. Well, in their own land, there was nothing but huts and potsherds. So that started the kind of that put people in opposition. And then in India now, there are some political parties that try to capitalize on this. So this is the issue. I really don't like this topic that much, but because there's so much interest in that, because for me, it's about cryptography. It's about reading the inscriptions, all of this stuff. The moment it goes into this thing, it becomes kind of unpleasant to talk about. Okay, but the evidence, I don't really see evidence for anything before 700 BCE, because Indus sites were there, they were active, they were doing their thing. They eventually became Janapadas. I mean, there's no discontinuity, right? So the out of India theory, as I said, I think the people have to work on it. People have to work on it if they want to. I am pretty much agnostic about that. I think we are out of comments. If there is, I think we can do closing comments and, schedule maybe a further talk on some other topic that has arisen from this, Steve.
Okay, well, I mean, we'll have to schedule at some point, in the near future. But I really enjoy these discussions, Yajnadevam. I think it's sort of frustrating for people like us, as you alluded to in your talk, your presentation, to have to be systematically excluded from canonized publication. And I could tell you stories over the year. I've been at it for several decades now, and I have no trouble getting published in other fields where I'm not perceived as any kind of a threat. But in this field, it's been very, very, very difficult. And I do have a paper under peer review right now. Fingers crossed, it might actually get published. We'll see. Probably the closest I've come so far, but it's frustrating. However, this is not unique. If you look at the history of other decipherments, you find that in the early going, before there was an establishment consensus, which usually conveniently comes long after, whoever it was that kind of broke through is dead. Like people today laud Champollion, whom you mentioned earlier, but it wasn't until long after he was dead, actually, that the rest of the scholars acknowledge, oh, okay, I guess he really, they found the Canopus degree and so forth. And so this is the unfortunate lot of those of us who are sort of trying to blaze a path, who are trying to find a way, is that we are typically going to be dismissed as cranks. And I've discovered that even having a PhD from Ivy League University does nothing to mollify people of that nature. It doesn't matter how many papers one is published, in peer reviewed, or if in something like this where the stakes are so high, it's very difficult. So fortunately, we have the internet and academia, all these venues where people like us can put our research out, get it out, and then let the chips fall where they may. We'll see what happens. But I really appreciate Yajnadevam. I think we're kindred spirits here. Obviously our methodology and some of our results are different, but we both independently come to similar conclusions, which of course even long after the Indo-Aryan invasion hypothesis has been, I think, soundly refuted and discredited. There's still this residuum of bias that, well, yeah, but whatever they were, the Harappans, they couldn't possibly have spoken an Indo-Aryan language.
Right.
That prejudice is still there, and people don't realize that comes from all the way back from, Henry Harris is back in the 1930s saying, well, probably these were Dravidians, they were primordial, and all this kind of thing. And meanwhile, because in those days they believed in the Indo-Aryan invasion, and so obviously if they invaded in the relatively recent past, post 1500 BC, they must have supplanted non-Indo-Aryans. Well, now that's been done away with, but the original bias is still there, Kuhnian style, and people are still trying to reinforce it.
Yeah. And, I think when you talked about our methodologies, I don't think, in terms of the details, it is different, but in terms of the intuition, I think, and I mentioned this in my tweets, is that if you had used the cryptographic approach, you would have come to the same results as me, because the way you think, I thought, was very precise and clear, right? You said that why is no one looking at the arrangement of the symbols? That's the one thing you said. And the other thing you said was the structure of the inscriptions uses compounding, and like there's like this the jar sign at the end, which is like a case marker. So I think that and then the way I've read your of course the decipherment, it's just that the granularity that you picked and I picked were different, so that's why you have different results. But if you use the same granularity, I think we would have had the same results.
Well, let me just point out, I mean, a lot of the skepticism that one hears today is premised on the idea that the script is undecipherable given the state of the evidence, and people, and which you recited. Well, there are no bilinguals, the descriptions are very short and highly repetitive, all this other stuff, and we don't know for sure, allegedly, what the plain text language would be. But what people are really saying is, I believe it to be undecipherable because no one has done it before now. So okay, those are two different statements.
Right. It's imagine European going to China for the first time, and he sees Chinese and he says, well, no one can read this, there's too many symbols. This is not writing, there are too many symbols. That's the kind of it's argument by unfamiliarity, right?
Yeah. Well, that's a topic for another day, I suppose.
We should definitely do the non-script hypothesis. I think there's a lot to talk about there. So thank you. It was a pleasure, and thank you for your comments and your like hand-holding and your response to the comments. I think people enjoyed that. We'll try to have more of this, maybe a little more frequently. I'm still doing a bit of work on the site and paper, but we'll try to squeeze in some more sessions. Okay, so he's asking one more question to you.
Oh, yes, I do agree. Yeah, absolutely. And again, you can read my proposed partial decipherment. I just put out a second edition, which has a couple of corrigenda from the original one, but it's on academia.edu. Okay, so yeah, and I absolutely do agree. And I think I'm the first Western scholar since what's his name? Back in the 1970s, there was a guy in England who came to a similar conclusion. But other than that, the preponderance of Western, non-Indian, non-subcontinent scholarship has been that it must be Tamil or Sumerian or something else.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you, and hope to see you soon. Thank you to the audience as well.
Thanks, Yajnadevam.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.